A cold autumn evening in Boston, the kind where the wind bites just enough to make you pull your coat tighter. Emily Dawson steps out of the elevator on the 27th floor of her husband's office building, a sleek glass tower overlooking the Charles River. In her hands, she cradles a warm container of homemade chicken soup, the kind she spent an hour simmering just for him. Her husband, James Callahan, is the man behind Callahan Properties, a name that echoes through Boston's elite circles. She smiles to herself, thinking of how he'll light up when he sees her surprise. They've been married 5 years, and she still feels that flutter in her chest when she imagines his grin. But tonight, that flutter turns to ice. She reaches his office door, the frosted glass etched with his name in bold letters. She doesn't knock, doesn't think twice, just pushes it open, expecting to find him hunched over blueprints or sipping coffee. Instead, her world cracks. There he is, James, her James, tangled in an embrace with a woman she's never seen up close but knows too well, Olivia Bennett, his new secretary. Her dark hair falls over his shoulder as she presses herself against him, her lips brushing his neck. Emily freezes. The soup nearly slips from her hands, but she catches it, her knuckles white. James looks up, his blue eyes widening in panic. "Emily," he stammers, stepping back. "This isn't what it looks like. I was just meeting with a partner. We had a few drinks." His voice shakes, a lie so thin it's almost laughable. Olivia smirks, adjusting her blouse, her green eyes glinting with something sharp, something triumphant. Emily doesn't scream, doesn't cry. She forces a smile, the kind that hurts her cheeks, and sets the soup on his desk. "I thought you might be hungry," she says softly, her voice steady despite the storm inside. She turns and walks out, her heels clicking on the marble floor, each step a battle to keep from collapsing. Behind her, she hears James call her name, but she doesn't stop. She can't. Not yet. Let's rewind a little, 'cause this isn't just about one night. Emily and James go way back, all the way to a scrappy little playground in Boston's North End. She was 8, a shy girl with pigtails, when James, 10 and fearless, chased off a group of boys teasing her about her thrift store shoes. From that day, they were inseparable. They grew up trading secrets under the massive oak tree in his backyard, carving their initials into its bark one summer when they were 16. "Forever," he'd said, pressing his forehead to hers, and she'd believed him. When she got sick at 20, her kidneys failing, James didn't hesitate. He gave her one of his own, lying in a hospital bed beside her, promising he'd always take care of her. Their wedding was a fairy tale, a small ceremony under that same oak tree, followed by a reception where he danced with her until midnight. He'd built an empire after that, turning Callahan Properties into a powerhouse, but he never forgot her. Every year on her birthday, he'd rent out the top floor of the Prudential Center, the tallest spot in Boston, and fill the sky with fireworks just for her. Friends called him the perfect husband, the kind of man who'd move mountains for his wife. And Emily? She loved him with every piece of her soul, the kind of love that felt like breathing. But lately, something's been off. James has been staying late at the office more often, blaming it on big deals or late-night calls with investors. She'd brushed it off, told herself it was the price of his success. She'd even laughed about it with her best friend over coffee, saying, "He's married to that company as much as he's married to me." But now, standing in the elevator as it descends, the image of him with Olivia burns behind her eyes. Her stomach twists. Was it the first time? Or just the first time she'd caught him? She steps into the crisp night air, the Boston skyline glittering like it's mocking her. She pulls her scarf tighter, her breath fogging in the cold. James had saved her life once, given her a piece of himself to keep her here. She'd spent years believing that meant something unbreakable. But now, as she walks home alone, the soup left behind on his desk, she wonders if she's been blind. "Maybe it's nothing," she whispers to herself, her voice trembling. "Maybe he still loves me." But deep down, a quieter voice answers, "What if he doesn't?" Emily Dawson sits at her kitchen table the next morning, staring at the coffee she hasn't touched. The house is quiet, too quiet. the kind of silence that presses against your chest. James didn't come home last night. He texted around midnight, something vague about a late meeting, promising he'd be back before breakfast. But the clock ticks past 9 and the driveway stays empty. She runs her fingers over the edge of the mug, replaying that moment in his office, James, with Olivia Bennet, his hands on her, her smug little smile. Emily shakes her head, trying to push it away, but it sticks like damp leaves on pavement. She stands up, restless, and walks to the hall closet where James keeps his coats. She pulls out his gray wool one, the one he wore yesterday, and presses it to her face. At first, it's just his familiar scent, cedar and leather, the smell of safety. But then there's something else, faint but unmistakable. A floral perfume, sharp and sweet, nothing like the lavender she wears. Her stomach drops. She hangs the coat back up, her hands trembling, and tells herself it's nothing. Maybe a client hugged him. Maybe it's from the elevator. But the excuses feel flimsy, like paper in the rain. That afternoon, she decides to try again. She cooks his favorite, beef stew with rosemary, the recipe his mom taught her years ago. She packs it in a glass container, drives to his office, and takes the elevator up. The receptionist nods at her, used to these visits, and Emily walks down the hall with a forced smile. She knocks this time, waits for his come in, and steps inside. James is alone, thank God, hunched over his laptop. He looks up, surprised, then grins. "Hey, you," he says, standing to kiss her cheek. "What's this?" She sets the stew on his desk. "Thought you might need a break," she replies, watching his face. He seems normal, warm even, but there's a flicker in his eyes, a shadow she can't place. They chat for a few minutes, small talk about his latest project, a high-rise in Back Bay. But then his phone buzzes on the desk, screen lighting up with a text. Emily glances at it, just a reflex, and sees Olivia before he snatches it away. "Just work," he mutters, shoving it in his pocket. She nods, says nothing, but her chest tightens. On her way out, she passes Olivia in the hall. The woman's wearing sleek black heels, the kind that scream money, and she smirks at Emily. "Nice to see you again, Mrs. Callahan," Olivia says, her voice dripping with something Emily can't ignore. She doesn't respond, just keeps walking, but her mind races. Days turn into weeks, and the signs pile up like snow in a Boston winter. James comes home late more often. His excuse is a broken record. Investor dinner ran long, or traffic on the Pike was a nightmare. One night he stumbles in at 2 a.m., his shirt wrinkled, his breath sharp with whiskey. Emily sits on the couch, pretending to read, and asks, "Rough day?" He nods, avoids her eyes, and heads upstairs. She follows quietly, watches him toss his jacket on the chair. When he's in the shower, she checks the pockets. There's a receipt from a bar downtown dated tonight for 2 drinks. She stares at it, her heart sinking. He hates drinking alone. Then there's the road trip. James used to love driving out to the racetrack in Westwood, a quiet spot just outside Boston where they'd watch vintage cars tear up the pavement. It was their place. He'd proposed to her there, down on one knee in the gravel, promising her the world. But last weekend he went without her, said it was a guy's trip. Emily didn't think much of it until she overheard Olivia at a company party a few days later, laughing with a coworker. "James took me to the racetrack last week," she said, loud enough for Emily to hear. "He said it's his favorite spot to unwind. Those cars, though, wow!" Emily froze, her wine glass trembling in her hand. She wanted to confront her, to scream, but she just walked away, her throat burning. The next day, she finds herself at the racetrack alone. It's quiet now, no engines roaring, just the wind rustling through the stands. She walks to the spot where James proposed, a faded red bench near turn 3. She sits, closes her eyes, and remembers his voice that day. "You're my everything, Em." She can still feel his hands, rough from work, slipping the ring on her finger. They'd laughed about naming their future kids right there, picking silly names like Rocket for a boy who'd love cars. Now the memory stings. Did he take Olivia here? Did he sit on this bench with her, whispering the same things? She starts noticing Olivia's little jabs more. One afternoon, Emily drops by the office with coffee, and Olivia's there, leaning on James's desk, showing off a gold bracelet. "James got it for me," she says casually, catching Emily's eye. "He's got great taste, doesn't he?" James coughs, mutters something about a client gift, but Emily's not stupid. She leaves the coffee and walks out, her nails digging into her palms. Later that week, she hears Olivia on the phone in the break room, her voice low but clear. "He says I make him happy. You know, happier than her." Emily stops dead in the hallway, her breath catching. Back home, she paces their living room, the one they decorated together after the wedding, the couch from that little shop in Cambridge, the bookshelf he built her for her birthday. Every corner holds a piece of them. She thinks of their walks through Boston Common, hand in hand, stopping for hot chocolate on snowy days. He'd wrap his scarf around her when she shivered, call her his city girl. She loved how he made her feel safe, like nothing could touch them, but now that safety's gone, replaced by a gnawing ache. She sinks onto the couch, staring at their wedding photo on the mantel, James smiling, her in that white dress, the oak tree behind them. "He saved my life," she whispers, tracing his face with her finger. "He gave me his kidney. That has to mean something." She wants to believe it, wants to cling to the man who'd promised her forever. But the perfume, the late nights, Olivia's voice, they're all there, chipping away at her faith. One night, she waits up for him again. The clock hits 11, then midnight. She dials his number, but it goes to voicemail. She leaves a message, her voice soft. "James, just let me know you're okay." He doesn't call back. She curls up on the couch, the stew she made for him cold on the counter. Her mind spins. Is he with her right now? Is he laughing, touching her, forgetting me? She closes her eyes, willing herself to sleep, but all she sees is that office door swinging open, James's arms around Olivia, and her own heart breaking in slow motion. Emily Dawson stands in her bathroom, staring at the little white stick on the counter. 2 pink lines. Pregnant. Her hands shake as she grips the sink, a rush of hope flooding her chest. It's been weeks since that night in James's office, weeks of late nights and half-truths, but this could change everything. She imagines telling him, watching his face light up like it used to when they'd dream about a family. A baby, their baby, might be the glue to hold them together. She presses a hand to her stomach, whispering, "You're my little miracle." For the first time in months, she feels something close to joy. She plans it out carefully. That evening, she cooks a big dinner, roast chicken with mashed potatoes, the kind of meal they'd share on lazy Sundays. She sets the table with their good plates, lights a candle, and waits. James promised he'd be home by 7, no excuses. She sits there, watching the clock tick past, 7, then 8. At 9, her phone buzzes with a text. "Sorry, Em. Emergency at the office, don't wait up." She stares at the screen, the candle flickering in the dark. Her hope curdles into something heavy, something bitter. She blows out the flame, leaves the food untouched, and climbs into bed alone. The next day she tries again. She calls him at lunch, her voice bright. "Can you come home tonight? I've got something special to tell you." He hesitates, then says, "Sure, I'll try. Big projects wrapping up." She spends the afternoon baking cookies, chocolate chip, his favorite. She pictures them sitting on the couch, her head on his shoulder, laughing about baby names. But when 10 p.m. rolls around and he's still not home, she knows he's not coming. She wraps the cookies in foil, her hands steady, but her eyes wet, and decides she can't wait anymore. She needs answers. It's pouring rain when she grabs her keys and drives to his office. The streets of Boston blur through her windshield, the wipers struggling against the downpour. She's done pretending, done swallowing his lies. If he's working, she'll see it for herself. If he's not, well, she'll deal with that too. Her heart pounds as she takes the elevator up, the same one she rode with soup in her hands weeks ago. This time, she's empty-handed, but her resolve is iron. She reaches his door, doesn't knock, just pushes it open. The room's dark, his chair empty. He's not here. She drives home, the rain hammering her car, her mind racing. Where is he? She pulls into their driveway, grabs her phone, and calls him. Straight to voicemail. "James, where are you?" she says, her voice breaking. "I need you." She hangs up, sits there in the dark, rain drumming on the roof. Then a thought hits her, cold and sharp. The hotel, the fancy one downtown where he takes clients sometimes. She doesn't know why she's sure, but she is. She starts the car again, heads for the highway, I-93, the road slick and shining under streetlights. She's halfway there when it happens. Her phone lights up with a text from an unknown number. She glances at it just for a second. "James is with me. He says you're nothing compared to me." Her breath catches, her eyes sting. Olivia, it has to be. She drops the phone, looks back at the road, but it's too late. A truck swerves in the rain, she jerks the wheel, and everything spins. Metal crunches, glass shatters. And then, nothing. She wakes up in a hospital bed at Massachusetts General, the beeping of machines filling her ears. Her body aches, her head throbs, but her hands fly to her stomach. A nurse rushes in, her face soft with pity. "Mrs. Callahan," she says gently, "I'm so sorry. You were in an accident. The baby, we couldn't save it." Emily stares at her, the words sinking in slow and brutal. Her baby's gone. She turns her head to the pillow, tears spilling silently, her chest hollow. She'd lost something she hadn't even had the chance to hold. Hours pass, maybe days, she doesn't know. James finally shows up, his face pale, his suit wrinkled. "Emily," he says, reaching for her hand. "I got here as soon as I heard. I was working late, I swear." She pulls away, her voice raspy. "Don't lie to me. Not now." He freezes, guilt flashing in his eyes. Her phone buzzes on the table beside her. Another text from that unknown number. "He was laughing with me when you crashed. Guess who he really cares about?" Emily reads it, her hands trembling, then looks at him. "Get out," she whispers. He protests, but she screams it this time. "Get out!" He leaves, head bowed, and she's alone again. The next day she's discharged, her body bruised, but her mind clear. She goes home, walks past the dining table with its cold chicken, past the cookies still wrapped in foil. She pulls their wedding photo off the mantel, stares at James's smile, and smashes the frame on the floor. Glass scatters, but she doesn't flinch. She's done crying. She grabs her laptop, logs into their joint accounts, and starts moving. First, the ring. She takes it to a pawn shop downtown, the diamond glinting under harsh lights. "How much?" she asks. The guy offers 10 grand. She takes it, no haggling. Then, the big move. She owns 20% of Callahan Properties, a wedding gift from James years ago. She calls her lawyer, a quiet guy named Tom she met at a charity event. "Sell it all," she tells him, "every share. I don't care who buys it." He hesitates, asks if she's sure. "I've never been surer," she says, her voice steel. The money, millions of it, she donates to a shelter for street kids in Boston's South End. She doesn't want a penny tied to him. She packs a suitcase, just the essentials, books a flight out of Logan Airport for the next morning. Seattle, a new start, far from this city and its ghosts. But James finds out. He storms into the airport as she's checking in, his voice echoing through the terminal. "Emily, stop! You can't leave me!" She turns, sees the desperation in his eyes, but it's not enough. "You broke us, James," she says, calm and cold. "You chose her when I needed you most." He grabs her arm, begs, "I'll fix this. I'll do anything." She pulls free, looks at him one last time. "You already did enough." He doesn't give up. He calls the control tower, uses every ounce of his influence, shouting, "Ground the planes! No one takes off!" Security drags him away as passengers stare. But Emily's already through the gate. She boards her flight, takes her seat, and watches Boston shrink below her. Her phone buzzes one last time, a text from James. "I love you, Em, please." She deletes it, leans back, and closes her eyes. James Callahan stands in the empty terminal at Logan Airport, watching Emily's plane disappear into the gray Boston sky. His hands are still shaking from where security pulled him away, his voice hoarse from shouting. He sinks onto a bench, staring at the spot where she last stood, her words echoing in his head. "You broke us, James." He knows she's right. He broke them, shattered the life they'd built with his own hands. The weight of it hits him like a freight train, and for the first time in years he feels small, lost, a man who threw away the one thing that mattered. Back at home, the silence is deafening. The dining table still holds the cold chicken she'd cooked, the cookies she'd baked, sitting untouched. He picks one up, crumbles it in his hand and lets it fall to the floor. He walks to the mantel, sees the broken wedding frame, glass glinting in the dim light. He kneels, picks up the photo and traces her face with his thumb. "What have I done?" he whispers, his voice cracking. He'd saved her life once, given her his kidney, promised her forever under that oak tree. And now she's gone. And it's his fault. He can't sit still. He grabs his phone, calls Olivia Bennett. She picks up, her voice smug. "Miss me already," she purrs. "You're fired," he snaps, cutting her off. "Pack your stuff and get out of my building by morning." She laughs, thinking it's a joke, but he hangs up, sends an email to HR confirming it. Then he blocks her number. He's done with her, done with the lies, the sneaking around, but it's not enough. He needs Emily back, needs to fix this. The next day, he posts a video online, a shaky clip from his office. His hair's a mess, his tie loose. "I messed up," he says to the camera, his voice raw. "I betrayed my wife, the best person I've ever known. Emily, if you see this, I'm sorry. I'll spend my life making it up to you." It goes viral within hours, thousands of comments calling him a scumbag, a fool. Olivia fires back with her own video, tears streaming, claiming he forced her into it. "He used me," she cries, but the public doesn't buy it. She's branded the other woman, her name trashed across Boston. James doesn't care. Let her burn. He deserves it too. He hires a private investigator, a grizzled guy named Ray who smells like cigarettes and coffee. "Find her," James says, sliding a check across the table. "I don't care what it costs." Ray nods, starts digging. James doesn't wait. He drives to New York, to the showroom Emily once dreamed of opening on Fifth Avenue. He walks the streets asking strangers, "Have you seen her? My wife, Emily Callahan?" They shake their heads, some recognizing him from the video, whispering as he passes. He flies to California, checks every beach town they'd visited on their honeymoon, hoping to spot her sketching by the waves. Nothing. One night, he's back in Boston, standing under the oak tree in his backyard. The air's cold, the leaves gone, just bare branches clawing at the sky. He digs at the roots with his hands, dirt under his nails, until he finds it, a tin box they'd buried on their wedding day. Inside, a letter he wrote her, promising to love her forever, to build a life of laughter and kids. He reads it, tears smudging the ink, and sobs into the night. "I meant it," he says to no one. "I still mean it." But she's not there to hear him. Months pass, and Ray finally gets a lead. Emily's in Chicago, working freelance at a design firm. James books a flight, lands in the Windy City, and tracks her to a small coffee shop on Michigan Avenue. She's there, sitting by the window, sketching on a napkin. His heart leaps. He's about to walk in when Olivia appears, wild-eyed, a knife glinting in her hand. "You ruined me!" she screams, lunging at Emily. James doesn't think, just runs, shoving Emily out of the way. The blade catches his shoulder, blood soaking his shirt. Olivia freezes, drops the knife, and bolts as people shout for help. Emily kneels beside him, her hands pressing his wound, her face pale. "Hold on," she says, calling 911. He's rushed to the hospital, her voice the last thing he hears before blacking out. When he wakes, she's there, sitting by his bed, her eyes tired but soft. "Why'd you do that?" she asks quietly. He grabs her hand, weak but desperate. "Because I love you, Em. I can't lose you again." She pulls back, doesn't say anything, just watches him. For a moment, he thinks she might stay. Days later, he's patched up, the stitches itchy under his shirt. Emily's been there every day, bringing him water, making sure he eats. He takes it as a sign, a crack in her walls. When he's discharged, he buys a ring, a simple band like the one he gave her years ago. He finds her at the hospital entrance, drops to one knee in the parking lot. "Marry me again," he says, voice thick. "I know I screwed up, but I'll spend my life proving I can be better. Please, Em." People stop, stare, but she just looks down at him, her face unreadable. She steps back, shakes her head. "You saved me, James," she says, her voice steady, "and I'll always be grateful for that. But you can't save us, not anymore." She turns, walks away, leaving him there on the asphalt, the ring slipping from his fingers. He watches her go, the pain in his shoulder nothing compared to the hole in his chest. She's right. He'd saved her body once, given her his kidney. But he'd killed their love with every lie, every touch he gave Olivia. He stumbles to his car, drives back to Boston alone. The investigator calls, says Emily's moved again, no trace this time. James doesn't tell him to keep looking. He knows she's gone for good. He parks at the racetrack in Westwood, their old spot, and sits on that red bench where he proposed. The wind howls, carrying memories of her laugh, her hand in his. "I thought I could fix it," he mutters, staring at the empty track. "I thought she'd forgive me. But forgiveness isn't a gift you demand, it's one you earn, and he's run out of chances." Emily Dawson steps onto the rocky shore of Puget Sound in Seattle, the salty breeze tugging at her hair. It's been 10 years since she left Boston, 10 years since she walked away from James Callahan and the life that nearly broke her. She's 32, no more, her hands now marked with faint lines from years of sketching, building, living. She's not the same woman who stood in that airport, suitcase in hand, heart in peace. Today, she's someone new, someone whole, and as she looks out at the gray waves, she feels it. Peace. She'd landed in Seattle after that flight from Logan, drawn to its quiet streets and misty skies, a place where no one knew her name. She rented a tiny apartment above a bookstore, started freelancing as a designer, pouring her soul into every blueprint. At first, it was just survival, a way to keep her hands busy and her mind off the past. But then she met Daniel Pierce. He was a lawyer, steady and kind, with warm brown eyes that seemed to see right through her walls. They'd crossed paths at a coffee shop, her spilling tea on his briefcase, him laughing it off instead of getting mad. "You owe me a new one," he'd said, grinning, and she'd smiled for the first time in months. Daniel wasn't a stranger, not really. Back at Boston University, he'd been the quiet guy in her art history class, the one who'd carried her to the nurse's office when she'd fainted from exhaustion. He'd liked her even then, watched her from across lecture halls, but never said a word because he knew she loved James. When they reconnected in Seattle, he didn't push, didn't ask for more than she could give. He'd just show up, bringing her takeout on late nights, sitting with her in comfortable silence. "I'm here," he'd say, and he meant it. Over time, those words became her anchor. Now, 10 years later, they're married. She glances down at the simple gold band on her finger, nothing flashy, just right. Their daughter, Hannah, runs ahead on the beach, her dark curls bouncing as she chases seagulls. She's 5, all giggles and scraped knees, and when she turns back, yelling, "Mommy, look!" Emily's heart swells. Daniel jogs after Hannah, scooping her up, pretending to growl like a bear. Emily laughs. The sound, light and free, something she'd forgotten she could feel. This is her family, her second chance, built from the ashes of what came before. She thinks about James sometimes, not with anger anymore, but with a quiet ache. She'd heard things over the years, rumors filtering through old friends. His company took a hit after she sold those shares. His reputation never quite recovered from the scandal with Olivia. She doesn't know where he is now, doesn't want to. But one day a letter arrives, forwarded through Daniel's office. She hesitates, then opens it, sitting on her porch as the sun dips low. "Emily," it starts, "I don't expect you to read this, but I hope you do. I've spent 10 years trying to be a man you could have loved again, but I know I failed you too many times to count. I hurt you, broke every promise I made under that oak tree. I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I'm not asking for it. I just need you to know I loved you, even when I was too stupid to show it right. Daniel's a good man, better than I ever was. Be happy, Em. That's all I want now. It ends with goodbye and his initials, JC. She folds the paper, sets it on the table, and looks out at Daniel and Hannah building a sandcastle. Her eyes sting, not from sadness, but from the weight of what was and what is. She'd cared for James when he took that knife for her in Chicago, stayed by his bedside until he healed. She'd owed him that much, for the kidney, for the years he'd been her world. But when he'd knelt with that ring, begging her to start over, she'd known it was too late. Goodbye, James, she whispers now, letting the wind carry it away. Back in Boston, James Callahan stands under that same oak tree, older now, his hair streaked with gray, the yards overgrown, the house behind him empty. He doesn't live here anymore, just visits sometimes like a ghost haunting his own past. He'd sent that letter a month ago, no return address, no expectation of a reply. He'd meant every word. After Emily left, he tried to rebuild, poured himself into work, but it was hollow. Callahan Properties limped along, a shadow of what it had been. Friends drifted away, the city moved on. He'd lost her, and with her, the best part of himself. He walks to the racetrack in Westwood one last time, the red bench still there, paint-chipped but sturdy. He sits, stares at the empty track, and remembers her laugh when he'd spun her around after proposing, her hand in his as they watched the cars roar by. "We'll bring our kids here someday," she'd said, and he'd nodded, believing it. Now he closes his eyes, lets the memory play like an old film. He'd bought the racetrack after she left, tried to recreate it for her, but she'd walked away from that too. "I thought love could fix anything," he mutters, his voice rough. "I was wrong." He pulls a photo from his wallet, their wedding day, her in that white dress, him grinning like he'd won the world. He doesn't cry, not anymore. He's cried enough for a lifetime. He tucks it back, stands and looks at the sky. "Be happy, Em," he says, a quiet vow. He knows she is, knows Daniel gives her what he couldn't. He turns, walks away from the bench, the track, the past. This is his ending, alone but accepting, a man paying the price for the choices he made. Back in Seattle, Emily watches the sunset paint the water gold. Hannah runs to her, sandy hands grabbing her legs. "Mommy, Daddy says we're getting ice cream," she squeals. Daniel walks up, smiling, and slips an arm around Emily's waist. "You okay?" he asks, his voice soft. She nods, leans into him. "Yeah," she says, "I am." They head to the car, Hannah chattering between them, and Emily feels the weight lift, the last threads of Boston fading into the dusk. This is where we leave them. Emily finding her peace in a new life, a new love, a family she never thought she'd have. James letting go at last, his regret a quiet companion in the years ahead. Love doesn't always win, not the way we expect, but sometimes it leads us to where we're meant to be. Before I go, let me ask you this. If you were Emily, would you forgive James? Or start over with Daniel? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me what you'd do. Thanks for sticking with me through this journey, and I'll see you in the next one.